Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive, frankly mind-bending mystery that sits right at the core of the human condition. It's a question that honestly defies simple logic. What does it actually mean to survive a catastrophic event? See, we usually picture survival as this clean getaway, right? A sigh of relief, the danger passes, and life just goes back to normal. But when we look at the reality of severe trauma, it tells a completely different, way more complicated story.
To get to the bottom of this, we're anchoring our entire exploration in Cathy Caruth's absolute game-changer of a book, Unclaimed Experience, Trauma, Narrative, and History. Caruth's work is revolutionary because, well, it forces us to flip our whole perspective upside down. We're stepping away from looking at trauma as just this isolated medical problem that needs fixing. Instead, we're going to look at it as a complex, deeply entangled, shared human history. It's all about how our wounds literally speak, and how history itself is shaped by the very things we can't initially wrap our heads around.
Okay, let's dive right into this with a really striking example from Sigmund Freud. Imagine a passenger in a horrific train crash. They walk away from the twisted metal and the absolute chaos without a single scratch. Physically, they're perfectly fine. But then, out of nowhere, weeks later, they suddenly come down with severe psychological and physical symptoms. So what gives? The body wasn't broken, so what exactly happened in the meantime?
The answer lies in this really fascinating concept called latency. Basically, latency means that the sheer shock of the event was just so overwhelming, so massive, that it wasn't actually processed in real time. Faced with that immediate life-or-death threat, the mind literally missed the experience as it was happening. It was just too sudden. So yeah, the person survived the physical accident, but their mind hasn't actually survived the experience yet. Instead, their brain is forced to just endlessly put this nightmare on repeat, desperately trying to master an event it wasn't at all prepared for the first time around.
To give us a vivid picture of how this brutal, repetitive cycle haunts a survivor, Freud actually turns to literature. He points to the epic story of Tancred and Clorinda. It's an intense one. Tancred is this hero who unwittingly gets into a brutal duel with an enemy knight. But after he deals the fatal blow, he uncovers the enemy's armor and realizes, to his absolute horror, that he just killed his beloved Clorinda. He's devastated, obviously, and buries her. Later on, he wanders into this terrifying magic forest. He's slashing blindly at a tall tree with his sword, and suddenly, blood starts pouring from the bark. And then he hears Clorinda's soul, which is trapped inside the tree, crying out that he's wounded her all over again. He is literally forced to unknowingly repeat this horrific act that he never wanted to commit in the first place.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how it completely shifts our perspective. Trauma isn't just about the initial act of violence. It's fundamentally about the crying voice of the other that is demanding to be heard from that wound. Notice how Tancred only hears Clorinda's voice upon the second wounding? The trauma is an address. It's a voice bearing witness to a truth that the survivor themselves simply cannot fully know or articulate on their own.
And we can actually zoom out and apply this exact same concept to a grand, historical scale. Take Freud's highly controversial book, Moses and Monotheism. In it, he radically rewrote Jewish history as this massive collective trauma. He threw out some huge ideas. He theorized that Moses was actually Egyptian, that the Exodus was a traumatic departure into an unknown future, and, get this, that Moses was actually murdered by his own people. According to Freud, this murder was deeply repressed, only to return belatedly, centuries later, to form the very core of the culture.
This brilliantly highlights a really crucial idea. The history of a culture is totally inextricably bound up with the notion of departure. History is almost never just a straight, clean timeline of easy-to-digest facts. Instead, history is more like a series of traumatic departures, where the big, world-shattering events are totally missed in the exact moment they happen. We really only get to know our own history indirectly, through the lingering, delayed impact of the very things we've repressed.
We can see this dynamic play out so powerfully in the world of cinema, especially in the iconic 1959 film Hiroshima Mon Amour. The movie kicks off with this incredibly disorienting dialogue between a French woman and a Japanese man who just met in Hiroshima. The woman insists over and over, "I saw everything." She's talking about the hospital, the museum, the newsreels, but the man relentlessly pushes back, telling her, "You saw nothing." It's this perfect visualization of the ultimate paradox of trauma. It's this intense tension between absolute confident memory on one side and the total denial that an outsider could ever truly know someone else's disaster on the other.
As the film progresses, the French woman finally opens up and confesses her own deeply repressed trauma to the Japanese man. Back during the war in her hometown of Nevers, she had this tragic affair with a German soldier, and he was killed on the exact day of her town's liberation. Afterwards, she says this really striking line, "I told our story, a story that could be told." So, the crucial point here is that by finally packaging up her specific, agonizing loss into a neat, communicable narrative, she actually feels a profound sense of betrayal. She feels like she's betraying her dead lover by reducing his absolute, singular death into just another story for the living to consume.
And that feeling of betrayal? It gets magnified tenfold by the historical context, specifically the ringing bells of liberation. As she lay there next to the cooling body of her dead German lover, the bells of Nevers were ringing out, celebrating the town being liberated by the French. It's this brilliant, heartbreaking contrast. You have this massive, public joy of a national victory right up against the private, completely unacknowledged tragedy of her lover's death. It really shows us how big, broad national histories constantly pave right over personal, messy traumas just to write one unified, victorious storyline.
All of this forces us to totally reevaluate the core struggle of the traumatized mind. We really have to ask, is trauma the horrifying encounter with death itself, or is it the agonizing, ongoing experience of having survived it? The French woman's entire struggle revolves around this impossibility. She can't possess her own distinct history because she feels completely tethered to her lover's death. She honestly can't tell where his dead body ends and her living body begins. For her, surviving literally just feels like an endless failure to die alongside him.
Which brings us to this incredibly haunting question the Japanese man asks her. When you are in the cellar, am I dead? He's asking her to speak to him as if he were her dead German lover. But remember, this Japanese man wasn't even in Hiroshima when the bomb fell. His family died, sure, but he personally missed the catastrophe. He's speaking to her from the void of his own missing history. He isn't offering her some easy, neat empathy. Instead, he's using his own profound lack of understanding to bridge the gap, stepping into her story because he can't fully grasp his own.
The climax of all this tension in the cafe builds to a sudden, really shocking moment: the slap. The man just slaps the woman across the face. Now, this isn't just a moment of physical violence. It's a structural necessity for the story. It acts as this sudden, jarring break in their shared illusion. Up until that exact second, they were totally lost in this confusing overlap of past and present, life and death. The slap forces a stark, undeniable distinction. It's a sharp imperative that basically demands they separate the dead from the living, finally allowing a true history to begin.
Let's move along and see how this builds, because right after the slap, their private little bubble bursts and the wider world comes crashing in. We suddenly hear untranslated Japanese dialogue between the man and a stranger at the train station. We see an unknown Japanese man speaking broken English to the French woman in a bar, ironically named Café Casablanca. By using these shifting languages and distinct cultural symbols, the film is representing the deeply entangled, super messy traumas of Japan, France, and America. It hits us with the realization that our own histories are always inextricably tied up in the trauma of others.
Okay, I have to share this absolutely fascinating behind-the-scenes detail because it perfectly mirrors this whole idea of untranslatable voices. Eiji Okada, the actor who played the Japanese man, he spoke zero French in real life. None at all. He memorized every single line of his beautiful, fluent French dialogue purely phonetically. He literally didn't comprehend the grammatical meaning of the words coming out of his mouth. By doing this, he introduced this incredibly unique, untranslatable voice into the film that totally resists easy comprehension. It proves that true communication across traumatic boundaries often relies way more on a deeply resonant voice than on literal, straightforward understanding.
We actually see this exact same dynamic pop up in Jacques Lacan's famous reading of Freud's burning child dream. The dream goes like this. A father falls asleep in the next room right after his sick child passes away. A candle gets knocked over, the child's shroud catches fire, and the sleeping father dreams that his dead child comes to him, whispering this desperate, heartbreaking plea, "Father, don't you see I'm burning?" The trauma here isn't really just the physical fire. It's the unbearable address of the other. It's a command. The child is demanding the surviving father to wake up, not just to put out a literal fire in the real world, but to awaken to the excruciating, undeniable reality of their pain. And that brings us to our final, provocative thought for this explainer. When we step back and look at the train accidents, those haunting epic poems, the cinematic ashes of Hiroshima, and these burning dreams of survival, we really have to ask ourselves, are we truly listening to the history of the other? Because trauma teaches us that we can only ever know our own history by understanding just how deeply we're implicated in the wounds of others. These voices of survival are out there, calling out, demanding that we hear them, even when their words defy simple logic or easy understanding. So the real question is, do we have the courage to actually listen?